we'll start today discussing some of the philosophical ideas that are going to support, and some of the new financial institutions that will be developed that will support this industrial society that is growing in England. And we're going to start with this guy, Adam Smith, and his ultimately what becomes, like we could say, the canonization. All right, canonization, C-A-N-O-N, like putting it to words, like making everybody able to see what he's talking about, of capitalism. Capitalism predates Adam Smith, but Adam Smith writes the book that allows people to look at it and say, yeah, that's what we've been doing for a while, or that's what we should have been doing for a while now. So Adam Smith writes a book, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Or you guys can just call it The Wealth of Nations. It's published in 1776, which the only reason I remember that is because that's a pretty important year for other reasons. Adam Smith writes a book on the wealth of nations in 1776. He is a Scottish philosopher. And his book ultimately becomes like the Bible for the capitalist worldview. And when I say the capitalist worldview, we're talking about a worldview that says that private individuals and private corporations should be controlling the means of production for a society. What I mean is that private companies, private individuals should own the resources of a society. It should not be held by the state. It should not be controlled by the state. They should be controlled by private individuals for individual profit, not from state benefit. Good? Adam Smith says that individual self-interest is the most basic motivator in a society. Why do we do what we do? Because we are motivated for one day to be prosperous. Why do you work so hard as students in this most challenging school? Hopefully we give you some intrinsic value in like learning and learning for learning's sake. But most of you are here because you feel in one way or another it enhances your future prospects. All right? You think it will allow you to be more successful in the long run. Adam Smith speaks that pursuit of selfish goals can actually be a benefit not only for the individual but for the society as a whole. Because if somebody wants to go out and be a baker or a butcher or a brewer, and this is a classic line from Adam Smith, and if they want to be the best baker or the best butcher or the best brewer that they could possibly be, the net result is a successful baker or butcher or brewer. But another result out of that is better bread, better cuts of meat, and better beer, which you guys can't worry about until you're 21, but better beer for the society at large. And so if the society is getting better bread that is being produced more efficiently, or better beer that's being produced more efficiently, that means cheaper prices for everybody else. And that is a net good, not only for the butcher or the brewer or the baker, but also for the society as a whole. Adam Smith also believes that markets should drive, individual markets should drive innovation. And when I say a market is a word for any place that goods and services are bought and sold. All right? That the market should be the driver of industry, not governments. Government interference should be minimal. That means like things like regulations, government regulations against industries, those should be minimal. Things like tariffs, taxes on imported goods, which is like the chief weapon of the mercantilist economy, tariffs should be eliminated. Individuals should be free to choose not only things that are purchased or produced in their own society, but also things that are produced in other societies. Good? Good. Adam Smith doesn't invent this. Adam Smith doesn't invent this. But Adam Smith puts it in paper. Adam Smith is going to allow these ideas to spread more rapidly and be better understood. All right? Another thinker that we're going to make brief mention of is a guy named John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill. He's another philosopher, this time from England in the 19th century. John Stuart Mill spends much of his time talking about individual liberty. And he writes a book called On Liberty, to make it easy for us to remember. And while he does not deal specifically with economic interests like Adam Smith did, John Stuart Mill contributes to this mindset that individual liberty, individual freedoms is essential for our modern societies. That individuals should be free so long as their actions don't harm the liberties of others. And that can be applied to the economic world that Adam Smith is writing about. John Stuart Mill is also a proponent of a philosophical idea called utilitarianism. That's a big word. Utilitarianism. If you get that in Scrabble, you win. Utilitarianism. That we should look not at how we get to an end process, but we should look at the end process itself. And if there is utility there, if the end is good, it can justify how we got there. All right? It was confusing. You would think Trump is a utilitarian? Okay. We will leave that for outside of our podcast here. The utilitarian ideal is summed up in the idea of creating the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. All right? Sometimes we can think of it as omelets are delicious, right? Who doesn't like a good omelet in the morning? You don't like a good omelet? But the majority of people in this class, we love an omelet. Omelets are good, but what must one do to make a delicious omelet? Yes, you've got to break some eggs, right? You've got to kill some baby chickens. So the utilitarian would say, if the end result, the omelet, is a good result for the majority of people, then the breaking of the eggs, even though that might be bad for a chicken mother, is not overall a bad thing. This gets applied to this time period in the sense of something like the British colony of India. If the end result is making the Indian subcontinent more England-like, right? Like modeling the Indian subcontinent, giving them a governmental system kind of looking like England's, giving them a military establishment kind of looking like England's, establishing an education system that looked like England's. And this is what Britain does to England. If along the way you've got some people, some Indians that want to hold on to traditional ideas and traditional culture, and they kind of get stomped out, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, but sometimes literally, well, the utilitarian would say, but the greater good for the majority of people, maybe not every Indian, but the majority of people in India, is eventually becoming Christianized and made to be like Britain. Well, then that is utilitarianism. The greatest good for the greatest number of people. It might not be the greatest good for every person. Someone's not going to like it, but it's the greatest good for the greatest number. So John Stuart Mill is important in the utilitarian movement. He's also important on this notion of individual liberties and individual freedoms. All right. We're also going to see the development of new financial institutions during this era, which will help facilitate the industrial growth that we are going to see. We've already talked about the birth of the joint stock company, right? Back with the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company and all the rest. The joint stock companies, we said these companies allow for greater investment because they allow individuals to own them. They divide their corporation into individual shares where regular folks with a few dollars in their pocket, can actually buy into ownership. And these create what are known as limited liability corporations. When I say limited liability, it means like if you're a sole proprietor of an industry or a business, if your business collapses, that means you collapse. But if you are merely a small shareholder, a small stockholder in a company, if the company does poorly, you don't lose your shorts. You've still got a stock in that company that could hopefully bounce back one day, but it's not your entire livelihood. We're going to see in the previous period the growth of these joint stock companies. But during this era, 1750 to 1914, we're going to see an explosion in the number of limited liability corporations in existence. All right? And that's going to be facilitated by the birth of actual stock markets. Now, I've already mentioned a market is any place goods and services can be bought and sold. So you might go to like Vince and Joe's fruit market, right? Or you might go to a fish market, or you might go to a meat market, all right, where you could buy all of these products that are being sold. In this era, we're going to have the development of modern stock exchanges, a stock market. Now, here's a picture of the birth of the New York Stock Exchange. It looks like nothing that you would see today, but it's a few pretty well-to-do individuals getting together in southern Manhattan and trading stocks, trading these shares of companies that they own. It's going to make it easier for more people to enter into these markets, right? Having a vegetable market established in your community makes it easier for people to go and buy and sell vegetables. Having a stock market, whether it be in London or New York or eventually Chicago, having a stock market makes it easier for individuals to go and buy and sell stocks, which is going to allow for more investment in these corporations, which is going to allow for these corporations to grow, and it's going to allow for other new corporations to enter. Because as we mentioned last week, what does it take, like back in the Middle Ages, if you wanted to be the shoemaker, what does it take to make shoes? Knowledge of how to make shoes. And you could do it in your house, and you tinker away, and you make your shoes. But in the industrial age, you need huge capital investments in order to start up these factories, right? And you need investors to do that. Well, a stock exchange can make it easier for your company to get those investments that you need. Good? We're also going to see further growth in an insurance agency or an insurance industry. Insurance industries that were born in the previous period to insure, for example, ships going across the open seas. When corporations are insured, it makes people feel much more comfortable about investing in them. For example, if you put your livelihood into an investment for a company and that company burns to the ground and there's no such thing as fire insurance, that's bad for you, isn't it? You've lost it all. But now that we all insure like, guys, think about it. Who drives, you guys don't drive cars to school yet. Anybody drive a car to school yet in here? I'm not quite there yet. I drive a car every day to school, right? That car cost me $20,000. Can you imagine putting something that costs $20,000 on a road with many other people that are driving cars worth $20,000, maybe even more? And many of those people, while they're driving these really expensive cars, are texting their friends about what they're going to do today? That's freaky stuff. And in an instant, I could get into a car accident that could destroy that $20,000 car that I am obligated to pay for. No one would do that. What allows us to do that with some comfort? Having insurance. Knowing that if something catastrophic were to happen, I wouldn't be liable. I pay a little bit every month or every 6 months. I pay a little bit to guarantee that I don't, in some catastrophe, have to pay everything. All right? Same thing with my house. If there wasn't insurance to protect our houses, no one would ever buy a $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 house. If one bolt of lightning could take it down to the ground. Oh, yeah. So we insure our property. And it makes us much more comfortable to buy big, expensive purchases. Good? Also, we're going to see in this era, the growth of these corporations beyond international boundaries. Because of increased ability to transport materials and to communicate. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Companies will no longer be bound by their local communities. And we're going to see the beginning of what we now call multinational corporations. Corporations whose businesses transcend national borders. We'll talk about a couple here. This is a map of the footprint of a company called the United Fruit Company. If you guys had a banana for breakfast this morning, you had something that is connected to the United Fruit Company, born in the 19th century. It was founded as an American corporation in 1899. And in the early 20th century, all the way up until today, in the earliest 20th century, if you were eating bananas, they were being produced by the United Fruit Company. In fact, their footprint was so great in the Caribbean and in Latin America that this company, United Fruit Company, began to exert so much influence over the countries where they were operating, whether it be like Honduras or Guatemala or Costa Rica or Panama. They exerted so much influence that they actually became a political force within these countries. We've referred to these countries kind of derogatively now as banana republics. If you've ever heard the phrase banana republic, why a high-end clothing store takes the name Banana Republic is beyond me. The word Banana Republic comes from the idea that this banana company was exploiting these nations and their political systems for their own financial gain. It's a really odd term to me that the Gap's high-end clothier, the expensive Gap clothes, are sold in a company called the Banana Republic. I don't get it. If anyone can ever explain it to me, please do so. So these countries, or this company would exert powerful influence over those countries in which they operated. An American corporation, but now having influence in overseas markets. And if you have a Chiquita banana, the Chiquita Corporation of today is the descendant of the United Fruit Company of the early 20th century.
What happened to them?
What happened to them?
Yeah.
They just evolved and changed names and ultimately don't have the same political control that they once had because those nations are now much stronger, but they're still a massive multinational corporation. Another one, you guys has anybody ever seen this before, seen this logo?
Airports.
HSBC. It's the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, or Banking Company. The Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. This is one of the largest banks on the planet today. Hong Kong, Shanghai. One of the largest banks on the planet today. Originally, it was a British bank, but with operations set up in originally Hong Kong and then Shanghai in the 19th century. That profited hugely in foreign investment into the Chinese market. And so here's just two examples of these massive multinational corporations that will be born in the 19th century. Now, what allows these massive multi-ethnic or multinational corporations to exist? Advancements in technology. Advancements in technology that we see happening simultaneously. You can't have the United Fruit Company. You can't have even a financial institution like HSBC without the enhanced transportation and communication abilities of the 19th century. So this is now getting into Standard 514, developments in transportation, developments in communication. We start with James Watt again. We mentioned his name already, W-A-T-T. And in the late 18th century, his steam engine, the Watt steam engine, W-A-T-T. In science now, the watt is the universal standard measure for what? Power, right? So the James Watt, lends his name obviously to his steam engine, but now scientists around the world deal in watts because of the power that they demonstrate. Watt's steam engine is going to harness the power of boiling water, harness the power of steam. And remember, what resource does one need to boil that water? So do we see how this is all so intertwined, right? Watt is going to harness the power of that steam to turn a turbine to do work for us, whatever kind of work it is we need. In this case, Watt's steam engine is going to be used to turn a little turbine that turns this rod that connects these wheels. And as that goes around, this steam engine, now we can call it, will propel itself forward. So Watt is going to be crucial for the development of railroads around Europe and eventually around the world. The expansion of the railroad is going to have 4 important impacts. All right? And here on this map, guys, we can see it's going to be born in England. This is where Watt was originally working. The steam engine will be born in England. And then from there, spread into Western Europe. Notice Belgium is the first landing point. And then it's going to make its way into France and Germany and slowly push its way to the east from there, getting into Eastern and Central Europe by the 1850s and 60s. Russia gets it a little earlier, but we remember Russia had some westernized contacts earlier than some of the other countries in Eastern Europe. Railroad's going to have 4 important impacts. It gives manufacturers, these people like actually making something, the ability to more quickly bring in raw materials and to more quickly be able to ship out finished goods. So on both ends of the production of materials, bringing in raw materials and then the export of those materials, the railroad will enhance the lives of manufacturers. Hundreds of thousands of laborers will find work where there otherwise wouldn't have been work in the construction of railroads around Europe and then in America and in Asia. So labor, jobs for people where those jobs might not have otherwise been for railroad workers. But also jobs in there's like maybe a direct result in literally producing railroads. But how will the existence of railroads have a like what we would call tertiary effect, like down the line, like impact other industries? Well, if manufacturers can bring in and export materials faster, what will those manufacturers be able to do? Produce more. They'll be able to expand their operations. Maybe start hiring more shifts to do. Maybe now they'll have a midnight shift, especially now with the electric light that's going to pop up at the same time, right? Or they could just grow their operations. They can produce more than they otherwise could, right? And then, if they're producing more, what are they going to need more of? People, sure. Labor, sure. The raw materials. So now there's going to be even greater demand for coal and iron and things like this, and lumber. So now we're going to have even more workers producing more of the raw materials. So we're going to see like the mining industry and the logging industry dramatically increase just because of now the existence of the railroad. Good? Good. Farmers. We're going to see enhanced agriculture because of the railroad. Because what's the problem with like producing produce? What happens to like fruits and vegetables that we produce? Yes. They go bad. They have like a literal shelf life. They only are usable for a short period of time. Well, what does the railroad allow? You can get it further distances faster, right? And so farmers can now produce more without the fear of as much spoilage because it can be sent to market much faster than it ever could have before. So we're going to see increases in agricultural activity. And then let's get a little selfish here. Railroads allow for people, like the workers, the laborers, to live further from where their jobs are going to be. The beginning of what we today refer to as urban sprawl begins with the railroad in the 19th century. Because in earlier days, you had to be like in walking distance from your place of work. Now you just have to be in walking distance from a train station. And so cities will be able to expand beyond the boundaries that they once previously knew. And we will also see, especially by the late 19th century, railroad as a leisure activity, travel as a leisure activity being available to more people. Not all people. Many people are still going to be left out of this, just as many people are left out of the travel industry today. but more people than ever before will be able to experience more parts of the world around them because of the advent of the railroad. Now you can like literally get from coast to coast because of the railroad, and some people will do it. Will do vacations. It was non-existent for middle class society to do things like leisure travel. Now that's going to be possible. Originating in England, as we've already mentioned, the railroad will spread its way across Europe by the late 19th century, connecting large and small cities with each other, and also creating new cities that are at the ends of a railroad terminus, for example. Like Los Angeles, California, wouldn't have been an important city if there weren't railroads connecting it to the eastern United States. A couple important railroads to mention. In the United States, we have our own Transcontinental Railroad. Here are some happy railroad workers posing for a picture in Utah in 1869 when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, connecting the railroads of the eastern United States with the Pacific. All right? So this one here, this green and this orange, connecting the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads, these railroads, that connection became the Transcontinental Railroad. Why was this such a monumental feat? There's a little mountain range in here we had to deal with, right? Didn't make it very easy. So railroads will connect eastern and western United States. Russia is going to get in the game. It's going to take them a little longer, but they've got to get further. Russia is going to create what's known as the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which is going to connect eventually all of St. Petersburg all the way to a town called Vladivostok, in the Pacific. This will ultimately be completed by 1916, so they get into the 20th century working on that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Trans-Siberian Railroad sounds horrible. Like Trans-Siberian, it must be all like snow and ice. No! Like, don't assume that the world looks like just what you would assume it looks like. There's a little stretch of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Looks quite lovely, doesn't it? Yes. Now, this is like one little snapshot of thousands of miles of railroad. But anyway, we should be familiar. Steam power is not only going to enhance railroad travel, but it will also enhance sea travel. No longer will we be dictating our lives on the open seas by concerns over trade winds, right? Remember those monsoon winds that dictated when we could travel between the Swahili coast of Africa and India? No longer is that going to be an issue, because now steam power is going to allow the elimination of the necessity of sails. Now, notice, there's still sails that we can put up. You don't want, if your steam engine goes bad, that could be a problem. Plus, when you are going with the wind, you put your sails up and what happens? You go even faster than you would otherwise go. But steamships will begin to replace sails on the open seas. To facilitate this, societies will develop, and here's how states will facilitate trade. Remember, we've talked about this before, right? Like the Mongol Empire making the Silk Road safer. States will facilitate trade with the construction of hundreds and hundreds of miles of canals connecting waterways as sea power becomes more viable. Here is the Erie Canal in 1825 that ultimately connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. There was the construction of a Kalamazoo Canal that was meant to connect Lake Michigan to Lake St. Clair. They started it, they never really finished it, but now we have a road called Canal Road, right? And there's a big ditch on the side of Canal Road at many parts of it. That's where the canal was going to be. In 1869, the Suez Canal will be constructed. In 1869, the Suez Canal will be constructed. The Suez Canal is in Egypt, and it connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea, which allows for faster transport between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. And I want you to notice what you can see as we look at this drawing of the Suez Canal as it opened in 1869. We've got ships with sails, to be sure, still in existence. But what do you see up here? Chug, chug, chug. We got some steamships, right? That smoke is from the burning coal, right? So there's the Suez Canal connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. The Panama Canal. The Panama Canal in 1881, connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. These canals will have a huge impact in, here's where the Panama Canal is. Would surprise you to recognize that the Panama Canal actually goes north and south. Huh, very interesting. You would think it would go east and west, but it doesn't. It was easier to go north to south. But anyway, the Panama Canal is going to make it far easier, and the Suez Canal, going to make it far easier for imperial powers to control their colonies, because they can more fastly get between the mother country and the colony, right? Another thing that's going to help these colonies be controlled by their imperial powers is the development of telegraph lines. In the 19th century, a guy named Samuel F.B. Morse, who develops a code for communication, is working on a telegraph. A telegraph is copper wire strung between 2 points, where an electrical signal can be sent through that copper wire. And Samuel F.B. Morse devises a language of dots and dashes. And a recipient on one end will send little messages with his dots and dashes in Morse code to a recipient on another end of a telegraph line, who can then hear and translate those dots and dashes into communications. And before the telegraph, you literally had to have someone carrying a message from point A to point B. Now that can be traveled at virtually the speed of light over a telegraph line, over copper wiring. Messages can now be sent halfway around the world within a matter of hours. The only thing that slows down the telegraph message is the receipt of those messages, translation, and then maybe it has to be sent along another line from point A to point B. But England can now communicate with its colony, its crown jewel in India, within hours rather than within weeks, right? Empires can more quickly now respond to crises and issues in their colonies. But it's also going to have a huge impact on these multinational corporations that can now respond more quickly to market changes, all right, or market fluctuations. Good?